All right. Hello, Algebra 2 students. This video covers 5.6. Probably should have wrote that on there. Section 5.6. And we're on the back half of Chapter 5. We finished up the first test on the first four sections, and now we're going to do the back half. And we're actually going to do these out of order. As weird as it seems, I want to do 5.6 first, and then we'll do 5.5 after that. The reason is the 5.5 to me doesn't really make any sense unless you know the purpose behind it, which is what we're going to cover here in 5.6. We are actually doing the same goal as before. So chapter 5 is about polynomials, which is what that crazy thing down there is called, where you have exponents that are numbers and we are just going to solve. So I think on the last test, the highest one we solved was an x to the fourth, but we're going to keep solving like x to the fourth, x cubed, and maybe mix in. I think this next test has even up to x to the fifth, right? And keep in mind that whatever this exponent is, that drives, if you do all the real and imaginary answers and you count multiplicities, that exponent is how many solutions it'll have. So keep that in mind as we're going through this bracket for chapter 5. So it's the same goal to solve, but we're going to learn like a new way to do it, and that involves synthetic division, right? So here is the process for it, and uh, it, I put down there as a bottom note. So I would copy down these steps, right? But just know that this is the general strategy. So there's different ways to do it, and every question's a little bit different, but generally you're going to find in your real solutions on your calculator. Remember, those are the x-intercepts, right? So if I had an x cubed, right, and it looked like that, I could get one of my answers off the calculator, and then after I get that answer, you're going to factor using synthetic division, and then you'll have something one less. So if I started with an x cubed and I factored out one of my answers, I'd have an x squared. And then from there, you're just going to solve this remaining x squared with either algebra steps or the quadratic formula. All right, so hopefully you've got those steps down, and we're just going to dive into a couple sample questions. All right, so first thing, again, copy this down, right? And you should be thinking, well, this has three answers. Okay, and on the last test, when we had four terms like this, we grouped them and pulled out a GCF. So like in this one, I pull out an x squared, leaving with 2x plus 1, pull out a negative 9 out of the back. They give me x and minus 2. Flip the signs there. But as you can see, these didn't match. All right, so it turns out that that type of factoring, factor by grouping, isn't going to work on this question. Right, so we're going to need a new method, which is what was on that previous slide. Right, so the first thing is going to be to type this in the y equals screen of your graphing calculator and see if we can find some of our answers that way. Right, so here's your graphing calculator, right? And again, if you don't have one, use Desmos or try to access the one that's built into Rapid Identity. So I'm just going to go here and type in and clear out anything I got in there. But I have 2x little hat thing cubed, and then just type the rest of it. And just to save time, I blasted it in there quick. Once you got it in there, you hit graph up here. All right, and I want to look for where it crosses on my x-axis. And we can see we got one answer here of -3. And if you do it right on these, they should come out as whole number values. So I could do that whole second calculate deal, but basically we're just going to call it good. So from the calculator, we got one of our answers. So we're kind of 1/3 of the way there. We got an answer of -3. All right, and so what that tells us from last test is if we have an answer of -3, then this thing must be a factor. If we work backwards, then we must have had an x plus 3 little factor. All right, so what that tells us is if it's a factor. So as an example, if I took 40 and you told me that 4 was a factor of 40, that would mean that 4 evenly divides 40. Okay, so we're going to do that same thing. We're going to say if -3 is an answer, x plus 3 must be a factor, which means it'll evenly divide this polynomial. Okay, so we are going to take and use synthetic division, right? And this is where it gets a little confusing, but you put in the window. Remember, I always said put in the window the solution. So our factor is x plus 3, but our solution is negative 3. So we write that in the window, write our coefficients, 2, 1, negative 9, positive 18. Okay, do our synthetic division. So drop the 2, multiply with the window, negative 6, add these together, multiply with the window, add these together, multiply with the window, 6 times negative 3, add, and we get 0. Right? So if we do this right, we should get remainder of 0. Right? If it evenly divides, if it's a factor, this little thing is truly a factor, then it'll evenly divide that polynomial. Right? So we get a remainder of 0, constant x and x squared. So what we're left with is 2x squared minus 5x plus 6. Okay, so we're going to solve that to get our other two answers. Remember, we still have 1 from our calculator, but we're going to get 2 more from what remains here. And it looks like on this, we could try to factor some more, but if it factored, the answers would have shown up here, right? Because when you factor, you get real answers, so they would have shown up here, right? So since they didn't show up on the calculator, we know that they're imaginary, okay? And we're just going to find those with the quad formula, right? Any x squared you can solve using the quad formula. All right, so there's our formula, and a is 2, b is negative 5, and c is 6. Okay, and again, you might want to just pause the video because I don't think I'm going to do the quad formula a bunch on these. But if you want to practice one more time on your own, it'd probably be good before you continue the video. All right, so I always start with the check mark first. So I'm going to do b squared minus 4 times a times c. So I get 25. Make sure you put a parenthesis there. Negative 5 times negative 5. Minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 6, 48. So that should be negative 23. So that's our check mark. And I'm going to do simplest radical form. So there's no perfect squares for 23, but I can pull off the negative part so that this becomes I root negative 23. All right, so our other two answers, if I complete my quad formula, I have the opposite of b plus or minus I square root 23 all over 2 times a, which would be 2 times 2, 4. Okay, so that's going to be our other two solutions. Right, so it's kind of a goofy, complex process, but we find our answers on the calculator, divide them out with synthetic division, and then solve what remains. All right, so I'm going to try one that's a fourth power. And notice the directions are a little different. It says find all the zeros. That just means find when this equals 0, right? So that's the same thing as having it set to 0 and doing the solution. So zeros mean the same thing as solutions. I would pause it, see if you can do that process that you have in your notes, the steps down there, and then that we went on the last question before continuing. Okay, so step 1 is on the calculator. So we're going to graph on our calculator and get as many solutions as we can for x. So I'm just going to type all that in the y equals screen. Okay, so here you see it in the y equals screen. Now I'm going to hit graph. And it crosses at, looks like negative 3 and 3. Okay, so I'm going to record those as answers, right? Because that's actually half my answer. So I'm halfway there. I got 2 out of the 4. Okay, now I'm going to synthetic divide with those numbers in the window. So remember, the answers go in the window. And you can go in any order you want. So I usually do the positive one first because it's a little easier to work with. Right, I take the easiest looking number. All right, so then write out our num coefficients. Make sure there's no gaps. All right, and then just go drop the 1, multiply with the window, add, multiply with the window, add, multiply with the window, add, multiply with the window. Okay, and one of the nice parts is you'll know it's going okay if you get remainders of 0. Okay, if you don't get this remainder 0, curse your teacher out a little bit, but then see if you can, figure out what went wrong. Usually it's your teacher's fault. Bad teachers. All right, and sorry, I kind of jumped ahead there. So that's my remainder. And so I'm going to cross that off and then synthetic divide again. So I'm not going to write out my answer or anything like that. I'm going to say, well, I got another number to divide. So I'm just going to take those coefficients, throw the other solution in the window, -3, and then synthetic divide again. So I'm going to go zoop, drop it, multiply, multiply, add, multiply, add. Okay, and again, I got remainder 0, which is good. And now I don't have any more solutions to go, so I have to just do this part. So solver remains. So this is constant x and x squared. So I have x squared plus x plus 2 equals 0, and I have to solve that using my quadratic formula. Okay, so I'm going to go kind of fast on this because I feel like the quad formula isn't the focus of this lesson. So I'm going to go really fast. So I'm going to do the b squared minus 4ac. So 1 squared minus 4 times a times c. So 1 minus 8, -7, and I square root that. So I'm going to pull out the negative part, so it's just going to be I root 7, no perfect squares for 7. Okay, and so my answers would be the opposite of b, so it would be -1, plus or minus the check mark part, which is I root 7, divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so I have 4 total answers, these 2 imaginary, and then these 2 real answers that I got off my calculator. Right, so 4 total answers. Right, because it was next to the 4th. All right, so let's see, do I have an x to the 5th? No, I don't have an x to the 5th in this one yet. So let's try one more then. Let's try one more x to the 4th, and just to save, oh no, actually you interpret this. So here's an x to the 4th question. And I did this first step where I graphed it on my calculator. So my question would be, what do you do next? Right, since you got here, what's going to come next? All right, and so the answer is you don't need to do, so that process I gave you before, I said that's the general process. So on this particular question, we have all the answers, right? -2, -1, 1, and 2. This one is next to the 4th, and boom, you can see all 4 answers right there. So you don't need to do anything else, you're done, right? You just have to realize that 4 answers, that's all 4 of them. Okay, so again, that process is a very general process. And keep in mind, I think even the stuff we learned last chapter would have worked here. So on this particular question, besides graphing, I think this one actually factors. This is the one that is x to the 4th x squared. And you can factor it by putting like x squared here and here to make the x to the 4th. And then find 2 things that multiply to +4 and add to -5. So that would be -1 and -4. Right? And then you could have just solved those, set those parts to 0 once you got it factored. So add 1 to both sides, take the square root, so you get plus or minus square root of 1, which is just 1. And then here add 4, take the square root, and square root of 4 is 2, so you get plus or minus 2, right? Which is the 4 answers we see up here, just a different route. So again, I want to stress that, you know, this method is just a general method for solving above x cubed. There's lots of different ways to do them, and each question is a little bit different, but generally this is a strategy, a good place to start, right? Start with your calculator and then kind of go from there. And oftentimes you'll do this synthetic division, right? Come test time, you can solve them however you want, right? If you had this last question here, you could have factored it, you could have got off the calculator, it doesn't really matter as long as you can get to the answers. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.